Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. The Ukraine War news update for the 7th of June 2023. It's about the fifth time I tried to start recording this video. It's all gone wrong, but this won't go wrong with it. Okay, a lot of news today. Let's go straight to our opening gambit. The General Staff for the Ukraine, their figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Please check out yesterday, one of my extra videos from yesterday where I delve into the data, this General Staff data over the course of the whole war, lovingly compiled and presented by a viewer, Dell. He's provided a read-only link for that. Go and check it out. I talk about the data, and even if you think that, this is 50% out of kilter, that actually, they're across all the categories, it's only 50% of the losses have actually taken place. You can still get a picture of what's going on, like the narrative that these graphs show you and this data shows you. Right, we know that the counteroffensive happened here. Yep, we've got an uptick in a loss of this and a loss of that. We know that this happened there. Yep, that's electronic warfare because we're getting ready for a counteroffensive. We know that artillery is having an uptick here. Okay, it all tells you a story, and this is why I go through this data. It's not so much the exact numbers. That's less important, but it's the picture it paints. So what is a picture painted of activity yesterday? 880 liquidated personnel. So that's up from 400. That's 300 to 400 more than we've seen over the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we are seeing the beginning of a counteroffensive. Yep, mainstream media is pretty much reporting that the counteroffensive has started. I think it's kind of arbitrary where you draw the line. What's the difference between a shaping operation and a probing operation and a full-scale counterattack? But is that arbitrary? Has Bakhmut been a shaping operation for the last 9 months? I would argue yes. So the counteroffensive started for me 9 months ago. Well, so you can say it started, you can say it hasn't. It doesn't really make any difference because things are happening, and that's what's happening. Doesn't matter what you label it. I could get into the philosophy of that, but I won't. 880 liquidated personnel then is an uptick, and what you would expect given there's all this activity. There's continued counterattacks around Bakhmut, and there are significant activities around Velika Novosilka down in Zaporizhia, and so on and so forth, and other places at Divka and whatnot. So, yeah, 13 tanks, 17 APVs, armed personnel vehicles, that's APCs, IFVs, MRAPs, all of those kind of things. That is a significant loss. It's a real uptick, as unsustainable. I would say it's going to continue like that. Tank losses are up quite a lot. We have seen very few tank losses, comparatively speaking, for the last couple of weeks because I think my theory is that, one, they just don't have as many. And because they don't have as many, not as many can be targeted and hit. And also, they use them more cautiously because they don't have many, because they've made such great losses. So they're using them cautiously, probably defensively. And now we've got into a situation where Ukraine are on the offensive. They're coming across these tanks a lot more, and wanting to take them out with drones and whatnot, spot them with drones. But yeah, there's as these battles are taking place, you will see higher levels of tanks on both sides being lost, and APVs. That is the same for that figure as well, but significant numbers there. Right, the next one, and it's big. 37 artillery systems, 4 MLRS. That's huge. I mean, I've seen some footage of an MLRS taken out yesterday. I haven't seen that much footage of artillery pieces, but then you've seen 100 bits of footage, you've seen 1,000. So, I even if this is only like 50%, if they've lost 20 and not 40, that's still massive. So they are losing huge numbers of artillery pieces every day at the moment. It's just the numbers have been staggering over the last 3 weeks. Now, people have said, and people continue to say, it's not a problem. Russia have got gazillions of these. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure that still works anymore. Right, if you're firing 50,000 rounds a day across the front lines, you're using your barrels at an incredible rate of fire, which means that they will become inaccurate, and that's a problem. And that could talk to why the Russians, not only do they not use as much precision guided munitions, as much of that kind of stuff, but they also fire inaccurately because their barrels are probably pretty screwed. Now we know they're struggling to get barrels because they've had shipments from Iran for barrels going back last year. Okay, so this is an ongoing issue. And the maintenance, and also we saw yesterday a trainload of hyacinth, a bunch of hyacinth, very old howitzers, towed howitzers being shipped into Ukraine, which is indicative that Russia are struggling for decent artillery systems. I mean, they still do damage, right? But I think this is genuinely a problem. And here's the thing: even if you say it's fine, Russia have got a bunch of artillery pieces, they've got huge stockpiles. Those stockpiles aren't just behind the ones that have been blown up. It's not like you're in an artillery crew and you're like, oh, we've just lost one of our howitzers. It's all right. Roll out the other one that's just directly behind it. That doesn't happen. It's not like they're lined up ready to go. These howitzers are back in Russia, back over there, back here, or you have to draft it from somewhere else, which means there's a weakness there, or whatever. They're not lined up and ready to go. And also, with each artillery piece that is lost, each MLRS that's lost, you're losing the expertise of the crew members that are operating them. Not all the time, but some of the time. And that presents a problem going forward. So these losses on a daily basis are huge. They are utterly unsustainable, and I think Russia will really be struggling in terms of artillery going forward. One anti-aircraft warfare system to add to that. Don't know what the value of that is, whether it's an S-300 or just an autocannon on the back of a truck. One aircraft, so we'll come on to that in a second. That's a fixed-wing aircraft that's been apparently taken out. 7 drones, 17 vehicles and fuel tanks, 3 pieces of special equipment. Again, that's a pretty decent. It's over the average at the moment. It's just over 1 a day for the whole war, so 3 is useful. That'll be something like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or electronic warfare, probably, but it could be D-miners, excavators, all sorts of other weird and wonderful things under that category. So that's a bad day for the Russians, a very bad day. And I'd imagine with the counteroffensive, being starting to get into its swing, you might see some very significant upticks in those categories. Right. Ukraine has shot down another Su-25. Don't know where. Only that this is what the general staff is claiming. So take that with a pinch of salt, maybe. But they're pretty accurate these days, I think, with such claims. Whereas with Oryx was saying much earlier on in the war that of all the category claims that the general staff make, that the aircraft is their least accurate one. But that might be because that's also uh, the category that you might find less evidence of. I don't know, but also I think at the beginning of the war they were less accurate in recording that than they are now, and they understand the information space and the importance of being, accurate with what they're claiming. Right, to sort of delve a little deeper into some of the stats. So you got an uptick in troops lost. Well, here we have 200 Russians in Zaporizhia filing into a building, and then that building being taken out. Apparently, over 100 of them dead. But I have to say, from this video, and this has been doing the rounds, it's quite difficult to make any definite claims out of this. So apparently, there are differences between the roofs as they're piling into the video, and then afterwards, it's slightly more destroyed or something like that. I don't know. It's difficult to say, but when you don't see the explosion, it's just a claim of that building was destroyed and those people were inside it. But it may or may not have happened. What has definitely happened yesterday, which is again, this is not good PR for the Russians. So the Russian state media has produced footage from a Ka-52 helicopter taking out 2 Leopard 2 tanks yesterday, except they weren't Leopard 2 tanks. They were just agricultural vehicles sitting in a field, in an agricultural field. Because, Leopard 2s, these top range main battle tanks that are going to be used in an offensive, you just have 2 of them sitting in a field on their own, not moving, with no other forces around them, no counter-offensive taking place, just literally sitting in a field of crops. Or these could be crop sprayers, in position, ready to spray crops with insecticide or whatever it is, which is what open source has now identified these as. And as a result, the Russian MOD get ridiculed. And then when they make claims, don't cry wolf. We don't believe them. We don't believe them because they talk such nonsense all the time. So then, the internet just went, hold my beer. I've got this covered. and then it goes into overdrive. So, here's a Leopard 2 identification sheet, which is everything. T family tanks, Humvees, infantry fighting vehicles, school bus, excavator, MX 10, and combine harvester. Brilliant. Brilliant. Uh, so yeah, didn't happen. And then, and just to make matters worse, Russians claim they took down a drone. Yes, well, they did take down a drone with electronic warfare, and then it was on the ground in a burning heap, and they plastered that all over Telegram and say, "Yeah, we've taken down a drone." Except it turns out that when you do the identification on that drone, good old open source intelligence, it's an Iranian Mojir 6 drone. So a pretty substantial drone that they've got for the Iranians, not their Shahed ones. These are reconnaissance drones, but big ones. Uh, they've taken out one of their own drones and blown it up, and then said, "Yay, look at us, we're awesome." So Russians have hit Kharkiv with S-300s quite a lot recently. It's consistently under threat from S-300s. The Russians have also been attacking an ammonia pipeline near Kupiansk. Second time in 2 days. That's interesting. Although apparently it's not been damaged yet. I don't think 6 hits were recorded, but so far no leaks have been recorded either. So uh, I don't know. I was under the impression that ammonia. This is a weird situation where Ukraine are still trading. They're still exporting ammonia to Russia to make fertilizer, and that's one of the weird things that's still taking place for some kind of agreement they have. So it's obviously mutually beneficial. But so I don't know why the Russians would be going for ammonia pipelines. Anyway, I could be wrong. Someone can correct me. Meanwhile, a fire in Bezlydivka, just south of Kharkiv. Don't know what's been hit there, but yeah, as I say, Kharkiv gets quite some attention. As does the entire Zaporizhia Oblast and indeed Donetsk as well, Mariupol. All of these cities turn up every day. I barely need to talk about them anymore. Melitopol, Tokmak, Berdyansk, Mariupol. Tokmak has taken a particular beating over the last 24 hours. At least 10 powerful explosions yesterday. That was reported in several places. Smoke over Tokmak. Then we've got Melitopol, Myrna, which is near Melitopol. I think a military base there was hit, as according to the mayor of Melitopol, Fedorov. Powerful explosion near the military unit captured by the Russian occupiers. And then 2 explosive devices were dropped on an electrical substation in the village of Popovo Lezhachi, Kursk region. Now Popovo Lezhachi and Tetkino are cut off from electricity. The governor of the Kursk region reports. So Ukrainians are still hitting places within Russian territory and causing them all sorts of problems. As far as the front line is concerned, before I get on to the big piece of news, which is the Novokakhovka Dam, or the dam at Novokakhovka, the Kakhovka Dam. The front lines have been, there's a lot of activity. Bakhmut counterattacks are still taking place north and south on the flanks of Bakhmut. I think Avdiivka, there's activity taking place. Velika Novosilka and around there in Zaporizhia, there are counterattacks and probing operations there. So you've got the usual stuff going on. Well, I say usual, that's only been a couple of days. But also, Novaya Tavlizhanka up in Belgorod is still under control, or at least partially under control of the Russian Volunteer Corps and those units. It's just insane that Russia is unable to shift pro-Ukrainian Russian forces out of its own borders. It's just incredible. Second greatest army in the world. Yeah. And the other day I saw claims of there was a propagandist saying if NATO get involved, they'll be done within 15 minutes or something like that. 15 days, I don't know what it was, some time frame where they're like, yeah, we'll do them straight away. It's like, you can't even take Bakhmut. Gee whiz. Anyway, let's have a look at the terrible, terrible flooding of the Dnipro River. I don't need to show you all the footage, and I'm sure you can join all the dots, or you've seen or read about this. The number of houses that have been swamped, destroyed. We've got oil refineries or oil depots being washed into. So you've got all the oil in the river. You've got animals by the hundreds of thousands, I would have thought, being killed. You've got an entire zoo being wiped out. The people. There's been no reports of deaths at the moment, but there absolutely must be, uh, because this whole thing came as a surprise to both sides. And this is right. I'm going to provide you evidence that is incontrovertible as far as I'm concerned that the Russians did it. But here's the issue. So the Russians did it, but both sides were unprepared, right? The Ukrainians are unprepared because they weren't expecting the Russians to do this because it's a stupid thing to do. And they wouldn't do it themselves because it's a really stupid thing to do for themselves. Goodness me, it's screwing up their counteroffensive capabilities, and is diverting a huge number of resources and a massive amount of money, and it's screwing up agriculture, lives, people. This is so terrible for the Ukrainians, where it's not for the Russians. However, some of their troops did get caught, and they had to evacuate. I think they've lost some troops. Now, what I as far as I can work out, and there might be a degree of speculation here, but these are some of the claims going on, is that the Russians blew up part of the dam, expecting only a small part of the dam to get blown up, and this to cause problems for the counteroffensive. But the problem is, it blew up much more of the dam, or at least when it blew up the dam, then the dam sort of burst even more. That force of that water just through all the sides of where they blew it up, and actually, this was, you know, far, far worse than they had envisioned because, they basically didn't plan for this wide scale, flooding. So it caught both sides on hot. Uh, anyway, uh, one other thing to think about is that, if you think about the occupied region, so imagine you're looking down the river as the river flows. So as the river flows, you have the left bank is on the left and the right bank is on the right as you're going down the river. So the left bank is actually, if you're looking at the map, on the east. So that's where the Russians are. Now, they've been sort of looking after their own troops, but they're not really bothered about the people who live there. And this tells you something. It tells you they're not really there to liberate. This is not their land. They don't care about these people, and this tells you that. Whereas the Ukrainians on the other side, on the right bank, are scrabbling around trying to save animals, trying to save humans, trying to do everything they can to sort out that absolute disaster that has happened. Emergency services going nuts, uh, all sorts going on. On the left bank, you've got, well, here it says many Ukrainians who stayed in the occupied Kherson did so because they were the oldest and most vulnerable, right? So they didn't want to leave. So it's like, we're going to stay here, even though it's going to be occupied. And right now, in this terrible night, they're crying for help in their flooded homes. The occupiers aren't coming for them. After all, it's only Ukrainians, and there's lots of, you know, lots of social media evidence of issues there. And I all I can think is that they would just have a lot of casualties on that side, because also as you look down the river, on the left bank, the occupied side is the lower side. So actually that will be more affected. You've got the islands in the delta that are basically being completely submerged and houses taken out. I can't understand. There must be casualties. There must be huge numbers of deaths, because this happened kind of sort of in the nighttime, very, very, very early morning, and that's a massive wall of water going down and taking out those islands. I mean, everyone would have had to have got off pretty damn quick. So anyway, yeah, we'll see as the I'd say as the dust settles, as the water recedes, we'll see what the damage has been. But it's absolutely horrific. Um, and then, flash news here says, by committing the terrorist attack on the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, Russia has admitted that the captured territories do not belong to it, says the Ukrainian representative to the UN. Uh, yeah, absolutely. It shows a complete disregard for that land, for the people, for the agriculture, for anything. It's just entirely about panicking over a counteroffensive, and that's all I can work out. Anyway, if we start looking towards the evidence as to who did this terrible act. A deliberate explosion, quote, a deliberate explosion inside the Kakhovka Dam most likely caused its collapse on Tuesday, according to engineering and munitions experts who said the structural failure or an attack from outside the dam were possible but less plausible. In other words, it's not been hit by bomb. This has happened. These have been explosions from within. Now, where it exploded is Russian territory. The Ukrainians couldn't even get there. So I think operator Starsky talked about this on his live stream last night. How like the part that was blown up is the Russian area, and the Ukrainians just can't get there. Like so, I mean, that's your first bit of evidence that that the Ukrainians couldn't mine that. Like they can't get in there, they can't do that. So yeah, it's not looking good for the Russians at the moment. U.S. government has intelligence that is leaning towards Russia being behind the Novokakhovka dam. Two U.S. officials and one Western official say according to the NBC. According to NBC, the US is working on to declassify some of the intelligence and share it as early as Tuesday afternoon. Well, I can share it now because it's on open source. The Russians admitted it before they did it on open source. It's on open source intelligence, and it was admitted back in December. But we'll get to that. So anyway, that's that. NBC News. The US government has intelligence that is leaning towards Russia being the culprit. Yep. Okay. So Russian messaging on the Kakhovka Dam explosion is inconsistent, challenging the official accusation. So the accusation that it was the Ukrainians that did it is sporadic, right? First of all, there's nothing to see here, nothing's happened, and then it was like, oh, it happened because the dam was weak, and then later on it's like, no, the Ukrainians did it, and then still you get all these conflicting narratives flying around, which is kind of what the Russians do. They're pretty good at throwing out conflicting narratives, confuse the information space, and no one knows what's going on. But I think this also shows that probably a certain number of Russians knew what was going on. And then the decision was made, but the rest of the Russian army and population aren't privy to those decisions and that knowledge. And so then there are all these kind of other narratives coming up as how can they explain the data here? Well, yeah, this is how you can explain it. Let me show you. So, stupid mouse. Right. Okay. But before we get that, just this is classic Russian PR, which is you've got the guy, you're the governor, is it, of the area or the occupied leader being recorded on TV with the nice in the background, but I presume can't really see the flooding and saying, I've just driven around, it's all fine. I've just driven through the city of Kakhovka, everything's working a few districts away, there's no big water presence at all. Literally below his window, it's completely flooded. I've just driven through the city of Novokakhovka and other cities on the left bank, people are calm. And it's just absolutely incredible. It's literally below that window. There's massive flooding. So Russians, yeah. Okay, Igor Gherkin said about the Kakhovka Dam destruction yesterday that it came as a surprise for the Russian forces. Quote, according to my information from the spot, the withdrawal to the flooded lower reaches of the Dnipro was completed, albeit waist deep in water, but in a fairly organised manner with small losses. Troops hastily consolidated on new lines. The evacuation was unexpected, both for us and for the enemy. Both sides tried to take advantage of this by actively using artillery. However, as reported from the field, the enemy transferred a significant part of his reconnaissance and corrective units to the Zaporizhia front, and his fire was not accurate enough to seriously impede the redeployment of our units. As for our artillery fire, I have no data on its accuracy, and yes, apparently I overestimated the degree of creativity of the enemy command. The breakthrough of the dam apparently was not linked to the offensive operation. So here Igor Gherkin is saying they didn't do this because there are some theories that they did this to make it easier to get across the Dnipro. It's just like doesn't make any sense. It's way more difficult. You've got houses floating down. How are you going to do an offensive operation across the Dnipro with amphibious craft when you've got houses floating down the river, when you've got detritus, when you've got all sorts of stuff hitting your boats, and the river has swollen, it's flowing far faster, and it's much wider to the tune of kilometers. It's like this. any pro-Russian voice who's saying that the Ukrainians did this to aid their own whatever, this doesn't help the Ukrainians in any way. And this is, the Russians did it, and to some degree, you can say it's a sensible move. Like from a purely militarily tactical point of view, it stops the Ukrainians from doing a counter-offensive across the Dnipro, at least for 2 weeks. Now, pro-Russian voices will still say, yeah, the Ukrainians did it. But you got Igor Gherkin here saying, yeah, the breakthrough of the dam apparently was not linked to the offensive operation. The enemy turned out to be unprepared for it, just like our troops. Nevertheless, all the previously stated threats, including for the Kimburn Spit, remain relevant. So I think this is implicit admission that actually the Russians did it from Igor Gherkin. But if you want explicit admission, you just have to go back to December the 10th, where you've got two Russians split. This guy is from is it the 205th Military Rifle Brigade or 205th something? And these are the guys stationed there. He said, "I've mined it. It's been mined." It's like, so let's see what he says. Okay, I'll mute it. So, did you just arrive from Kherson? Yes, from Kherson. Are you going back to Kherson? To the left bank? No, we're going back to Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant now. To Kakhovka, that's where our people took everything. What do you say? Sorry, it's quite difficult. That's where our people took everything. We've mined everything there. What are you saying? A present? Why are you saying that? A New Year? It's a New Year's present. So it's really difficult to get this. A present? It doesn't matter, guys. In short, on January the 1st, the Kakhovka hydroelectric station will be blown up and the entire Ukrainian army on the other bank will be washed away. And this is what this guy said back in December the 10th. So this is going to be a New Year's present. Holy SH1T. Won't our guys die there? We've already taken all of them, he says. So this water will go to Kherson too, or not? Yes, to the left bank, to Kherson. Kherson will be completely washed away. FUCK. We've mined it, we've cleaned it up. You choose the lesser of two evils? I see. How else could you guys do it? If it's such a secret, would you say that to ordinary guys or what? And the voiceover says, they might say that, but in reality, it's even worse. What they told us to mine, we mined. That's what they say, but they might not do it. No, we mined it. They'll blow up the dam, that's for sure. And then there's no telling what will happen. So this is, I think, a conversation between three people, a voiceover and two people on video. OMG. There's no telling what will happen. So sorry, I couldn't easily get the subtitles there well, but you get the idea that back in December the 10th, this was admitted by Russians who were fighting in that area, stationed in that area, that they've mined it. They were going to blow it up on January the 1st. Obviously, haven't blown it up on January the 1st, but you've got the clear admission there. And then, and I think Operator Starsky also shared this as well. And this is from October. This is even before, 205th Motorized Rifle Brigade. So it's the same guys talking about the mining. This is openly on Telegram. This is on their Telegram channel where they having a plan in place for it. Operator Starsky talks even more about this and some details from, I think, before some of the conversation from just before where this starts. But according to their estimate, it will be mined with a probability of 70%, as in, what this is a Google translation. What I understand from this is that they said there's a 70% chance that we're going to blow it up. and then it says, and when there's dam failure, here are all the things that need to happen and where all the people need to go. Confirmed information about our mining of the dam and the mining of it in the blowing of it up in the event of an uncontrolled advance of the enemy. Quote from the operation plan. So, in other words, with an uncontrolled advance from the enemy. So, if the enemy is attacking, we are going to blow it up. Well, we've got a counter-offensive just about to take place. Blow it up, and this is what they said back in October. So you've got all sorts of bits of data like this that are already out there. I think it's fairly obvious that the Russians did it. Okay, some of the estimated impacts of the breached dam to Ukraine's agricultural sector. Ukraine's Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food said early estimates suggest that around 25,000 acres of agricultural land has been flooded on the right bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson and several times more on the opposite, occupied side of the waterway. In addition, the disaster will stop the supply of water to 31 so-called field irrigation systems. Each irrigation system irrigates some 1.4 million hectares of farmland, and the land could have yielded a total of some $1.5 billion worth of grain and oilseeds, the ministry said, stressing the estimates could change. The amount of farmland that this is going to affect is phenomenal. Uh, and, just to throw in other issues, animals have obviously been really big victims here. The zoo in occupied Nova Kakhovka was completely flooded and all the animals died. So that is, all of those animals that you can see there will be dead. So there you go, ecocide on a huge scale, but just all the wildlife all along there, all the habitats will be completely destroyed. All the agriculture, as we've heard, all the people in their houses. There will be deaths of people. There will be people who have lost everything. And then you've got the jobs, you've got the economic impact of this to that whole region. This is absolute, and the pollution, absolutely catastrophic. Uh, but on the right bank, you have people. Andrei from Ukrainian Kherson is my favorite human. It's been hours for him spending in toxic water, rescuing animals and humans trapped in a fallout of Russian-made ecocide. So there he is, some chap saving that dog who was trapped inside a house. That's fantastic. But yeah, there's going to be lots of this. I'm sure it's happening on both sides, but the difference being that on the right bank, you've got a government-led system of aid. Look at all those dogs that have been helped and rescuing, which is organised, and on the left bank in the occupied region, I don't know that that's taking place. Okay, moving on. Spent a lot of time on that, so sorry about that. The security service has exposed a Russian GRU spy network, which was spying on the defense forces at the Yavoriv training ground, the press service of the SBU reports. There's a number of these instances taking place. The figures turned out to be 2 Ukrainian military men and a doctor, according to the investigation. They were attracted to cooperation by a career officer of the Russian military intelligence. Now, all members of the undercover group have been exposed. The perpetrators face up to 15 years in prison or life imprisonment. I always wonder about the motivation of that. Is it money? Is it ideology? What's going on? Yeah. So military aid and whatnot. The US is preparing a new military aid package or set of packages to Ukraine. Quote, I guarantee you that you will see additional packages of security assistance in the coming days and weeks. We will continue to do everything possible so that Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield, said John Kirby. The US are still keeping up there with that. Now, Zelensky says Ukraine is to receive, quote, significant number of F-16s. President Volodymyr Zelensky said during a press conference that Ukraine will receive a significant number of F-16 fighter jets based on discussions with European partners, Suspilna reported. And there was talk yesterday about F-18 Hornets coming from Australia, possibly. I mean, that's what Ukraine want, and there should be no reason. I mean, they're going to be scrapped. So, 41, I think it is, would be a useful number of Hornets. Ukraine will receive more Marder infantry fighting vehicles. The German MOD has commissioned Rheinmetall to prepare 20 for transport, and they will be delivered by the end of July. Rheinmetall also offered to send another 60, but they need preparation first. Now, this is really good news because Ukraine will need these pieces of kit to keep coming in a consistent basis to replace the attrited equipment that they will lose as a result of the counteroffensive. The counteroffensive will be expensive for the Ukrainians. There's no doubt about that. They need to be prepared for that. Czech State Enterprise VOPCZ will start repairing Ukrainian T-64 tanks. These are tanks that have been in storage for decades and require complete refurbishment, and will also receive modern optics, communications, etc. VOP. So these, I presume, are ones that the Czechs have in storage, old T-64. They've already provided loads of old like T-72 and newer tanks, and now they're going back into their storage to see what they can do. VOP personnel recently visited Ukroboronprom plants in Ukraine to establish mutual cooperation. The repair and modernization will be carried out under strict security measures and under the supervision of specialists from Ukroboronprom. The Czech Republic supports and will support Ukraine in its fight against the Russian aggressor. Is this statement? We are providing unneeded military material, training Ukrainian soldiers, and now are also helping to repair Ukrainian equipment. We are offering our knowledge and skills in training and repair and gaining valuable combat experience from the Ukrainians. I don't know whether some of these tanks will actually, they're talking about repairing them from Ukraine, but then upgrading them as they repair them. So it could be that rather than they talked about unneeded material. So it could be a mixture of stuff in storage, older tanks in storage, and ones that are brought back to be fixed up, damaged from the front line, and then upgraded too. Okay, Serbian President Vucic, generally in support of Russia, traditionally backing Russia, as it says here, will not prevent Serbians sold ammunition going to Ukraine. Quite, I'm not a fool. I am aware that some of the arms might end up in Ukraine, but we maintain neutrality, he told Financial Times. Yeah. Kuleba, who's the foreign minister for Ukraine. The EU is to help Ukraine ease the consequences of the Kakhovka dam destruction. The European Union is ready to aid Ukraine in mitigating the consequences of the destruction, Ukraine's foreign minister Kuleba said after a phone call with the EU's chief diplomat. That'd be Josep Borrell, I would have thought. Okay, on to geopolitical stuff. One of the main tasks of Poland during its 2025 presidency of the European Commission will be to facilitate the accession of Ukraine, the countries of the Western Balkans, and Moldova to the European Union, reports President of Poland, Andrzej Duda. In addition, the President of Poland called on the NATO allies to respond more actively to the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the complicity of Belarus, as they also threaten the eastern flank of the alliance. Now, I talked about Poland a little bit, so there are massive, massive protests because you've got this weird thing in Poland where they are really pro-Ukraine, but actually the government is a really nationalist government that is fairly anti-EU, and they've done some democratic backsliding, and it's a bit of a problem. And they're also trying to, why they had these massive protests is because they're trying to pass this law that says if you've done any deals with Russia before in the last 20 years, and they made it like really so it conveniently covers Donald Tusk's involvement, who was heavily involved. He's now runs one of the opposition political parties, was previously one of the heads in Europe and the EU. So he's going to be an opposition leader, and then basically and could run for president and could oust like Duda. I may be butchering some of this. It might be prime minister. I don't know exactly what's going on, but they're changing the rules that would mean that under the guise of it being to protect security from Russian influence, make the government more secure and protect it from influence from Russia. But actually, it's a way of them invalidating Donald Tusk from running. And that's why they all came out in against this, because it would be an undemocratic way of doing it as well. So I think the people who make these decisions are like selected by the government. I don't know. I'll have to go and get the actual details of this and probably go through it on an extra. But there are some saying, hey, no, this is the people in government saying, no, this is to make it, more secure and better going forward, and we won't be influenced by Russia. And everyone else is saying, no, you're doing this so that these people can't run against you, because they have previously done deals when in government with the Russians, bona fide, so on and so forth. So that there's some interesting political machinations taking place in Poland at the moment. So, the UN ambassador to the OCSE says the destruction of Nova Kakhovka Dam is an outrageous act of environmental destruction that imperils the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, as well as the natural environment. From the start of this war, Russia has shown no respect for civilian life or infrastructure. Ukraine must win. I mean, the rest of the world needs to be really, really strong. In fact, I think the ramifications should be massive. I think Russia should be really hit for this. However, on the flip side, 3 months before the saboteurs bombed Nord Stream, Biden administration learned from a close ally that the Ukrainian military had planned a covert attack using a small team of divers who reported directly to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. In fact, The Guardian reports this as the Biden administration received an intelligence report that Ukraine had a plan for the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines 3 months before an underwater explosion disabled the natural gas link from Russia to Germany, the Washington Post has reported. A European intelligence service told the CIA that the Ukrainian military was planning an attack using a small team of divers who reported directly to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the paper reported. The six-person team reported directly to General Valery Zaluzhny, the report claims, so that President Volodymyr Zelensky would know nothing about the operation, would not know about the operation. Interesting. The Washington Post report was based on a larger leak of secret documents. So this is stuff that's come out of the Discord server, the Jack Teixeira leaks. So the reports posted online by Air National Guard member Jack Teixeira first came from a European intelligence agency, later shared with the US and then Germany, and then were corroborated by security officials from a number of countries, the Washington Post reported. The intelligence report shared with the CIA was drafted in June 2022, the paper reported. The paper described a plot similar to one now being considered by German investigators. 6 men using false identities sailed a small boat into the Baltic Sea and, using diving equipment including helium supplies for especially deep dives, planted explosives that severed the pipeline. But other details differ between the intelligence report and versions of the attack now being considered by German authorities. The information was sourced by an unidentified individual from Ukraine. So, still a lot of murkiness around the details here. It's what we definitely know is that either the German working theory as to what happened and this account in the Washington Post, but actually both of these are mutually exclusive, contradictory to what Seymour Hersh claimed. The big bombshell article he wrote saying it was a US with the Norwegians and they did this and all of this data to do with all these boats and all this stuff. And it sounded really plausible because he put loads of intricate details in certain parts. That was kind of blown out of the water, so to speak, by open source intelligence people just picking holes in his narrative, and just completely goes against what these two claims are, which it wasn't the Americans or Norwegians, it's the Ukrainians doing it themselves. So anyway, either way, if it's not Russia, it's a big problem going forward, geopolitically speaking, and there'll be some fallout to that, I'm sure, but we'll keep an eye on that. And then the last thing to say is that Iran has added 15 ships to its trade maritime fleet in the Caspian Sea amid growing great trade ties with Russia and other countries located to the north of Iran. So Iran, Caspian Sea, Russia, that's how they get a lot of their equipment to Russia. There is Operator Starsky on his live stream last night said that there was rumors about an Iranian ship, cargo ship, sinking in the last 2 days, but I can't see any evidence of that. He's talking about it possibly having a whole load of ammunition for the Russians on board, and that would ring loads of alarm bells in terms of sabotage, that wouldn't it? But yeah, I don't know about that. Anyway, that's the news from today. Sorry, I butchered some of my explanations. My brain is running overtime at the moment. Too much information, too much stuff going on. So I apologize for that. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.